Hey, everybody. This is Kelly Jackson with TruthWire News. I am coming to you today. It is election season. So I am coming to you today with yet another candidate running in our great state of Tennessee. This man here, Brian Hooper, he is running for the Houston County Sheriff's Department. He wants to be Houston County's next sheriff. And I am just delighted to be able to sit down and have a conversation with him today. And I really hope that you get a lot of value out of this if you were trying to figure out who you're going to vote for. And we will have a discussion about all the things. And so thank you so much for being here with me, Brian. How are you doing today? And thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Kelly. It's an honor to be here. And we're doing great in Houston County. We're in our second week of early voting. So we have a tent set up outside the election office, making ourselves available to all the voters for any last minute questions. But I'm really looking forward to this interview.
So give me a little bit, we talked a little bit before we started recording. So give me some of your background so that Tennesseans who aren't aware of you have a flavor for where you've come from and, why you're seeking this office.
Yeah, so I'm like a lot of other Tennessee families that's moved here. My dad was in the military, and he was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs. And so I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado. I do have family roots that go back to the Humphreys County area here in Tennessee, into the McEwen area. We used to come out here when I was a teenager and visit my grandmother. So I graduated high school in Pueblo, and I knew I was going to take one of two paths, and that was either join the military or public service, which I knew was going to be in law enforcement. So I did end up moving here in 1994. I went to work for the Tennessee Department of Corrections. I worked at Turney Center Industrial Prison for a while, and then I transferred to Riverbend Maximum Security Prison. And then I did go to work for Davidson County Sheriff's Office for a short time, but that's a civil sheriff's office. They're not a law enforcement entity. So I was fortunate enough. I met the current sheriff at that time in 2000 here in Houston County, Kenny Barnes, and he offered me a job. And I started in the jail. I worked really hard to prove myself and showed him what my goals and ambitions were. And within a year, he had me in the police academy, and I became a deputy.
Nice.
So I have served as a law enforcement officer ever since, and currently serve in that role.
Yeah. So as you just stated, you spent more than 27 years in law enforcement, serving corrections, patrol, investigations, school safety, leadership, and administration. But
Yes.
You've also been recognized as Officer of the Year, and you recently completed the National Association of School Resource Officers Practitioner Certification Exam, which I don't think very many people know actually exist, because we just think that people get placed in our schools and they don't understand. But looking back over your career, what experiences have best prepared you to lead the Houston County Sheriff's Office, and why do those experiences matter for the challenges that the county is facing now?
So I think there's probably several branches to my career that stand out. In 2004, I went to criminal investigation school, and I think that once I completed that and started serving in a role with the Aaron Police Department as a detective and working all of our criminal cases, I think that my perception of law enforcement began to change. I started to realize, hey, there's more to like traffic, writing tickets or just being reactive to calls. Being able to be a voice to those who are victims of a crime that they're relying on you to hold those accountable and try to start putting the pieces back together. I became very successful at investigations throughout my career. In 2010, I took a position with the Houston County Sheriff's Office under the newly elected sheriff at that time as a criminal investigator. And I worked every criminal case within Houston County by myself for 5 years. And so, again, I feel I was extremely successful during that time. As my career progressed, in 2015, I accepted a position and ultimately became the assistant police chief in McEwen. So that leadership responsibility, working with budgets and policies, and also still managing the staff there in McEwen, and still being responsible for investigations and patrol aspects, because it's a small agency.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to do it all.
Yeah. You wore a lot of hats.
You wear a lot of hats. So I really think that prepared me as far as the administrative part of what being sheriff entails. In 2021, I accepted a position with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, which is where I'm currently at. I'm one of 2 criminal investigators assigned to the school resource division. So we work all criminal cases within the school system. And I don't think I ever realized the importance of school safety as I did during this last 5 years. And as you mentioned, like the practitioner status, the recognition from NASRO, I think that even our state and with the grants that are put out for the SROs in all the schools, they recognize the importance of having specific school safety training to protect our students and staff in these schools. And so as a practitioner, you have to achieve not only the basics, but the advanced, and then go beyond that for them to recognize you as a practitioner. And I've worked really hard over the last 5 years to achieve that recognition. And I think that if elected sheriff here in Houston County, I'm going to be able to bring that training and experience here to protect our students and staff.
Yeah. So speaking of that, that sort of just dovetails perfectly into my next question. So as you mentioned, it's a specialized type of training and certification that most people don't understand. There's more to it. Obviously, you're dealing with kids. So that's a whole other ball of wax, because as we know, kids don't have the same rights that adults do. And so it would entail in the same, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Constitutionally, they just, it's a completely different thing. And so when you're dealing with kiddos who have maybe emotional or behavioral issues and things like that, it really takes specialized training. I used to work for a while when we first moved here. I worked as a special education TA because my kids all have IEPs. So I can appreciate what kind of environment you must have been dealing with on a daily basis. It's not like you're working in a jail or you're dealing with adults, you're dealing with kids. But because you had specialized training, how would you implement some of those best practices if you're elected sheriff?
Well, I think just on the surface, most of your agencies, when they have their SRO program, I know like in Montgomery County, they require like a 2-year experience level, from patrol. Like they don't just hire you in off the street for an SRO. And that's because there's a big difference between working in the schools and working out on the street. So for example, an SRO, you kind of go off the triangle model, like a protector, an educator, and a mentor. So what you have to be careful of when you have SROs in the school is you have to understand what your role is compared to what the school educational law or what their role is. And it's easy for the school staff to get frustrated and then want to call an SRO to help deal with a behavioral student that may have that IEP. But what the SRO has to be careful, because we can violate rights of that student that they do have, especially under that IEP contract that the parents have. So you have to understand that when the SRO is not there to address school rules or behavioral issues that the school is mandated by law to address and to manage. So working in such a big school environment like Montgomery County, we have 40,000 students and 6,000 employees there. So we deal a lot in a large variety of students and staff that goes on. And I think that as sheriff in Houston County, we're a smaller county, 10,000 residents, and this is one of the smallest counties in the state. But to take that experience and that knowledge and training and bring that to Houston County, I've talked to the school board director here on a couple of different occasions, and they're excited about the partnership that we may have together. And we look forward to that. But I think you have to understand the role and understand, like, we can't step into the role as the disciplinary or the school, hey, that student won't take his hoodie off, and then they call the SRO. Well, that's not the SRO's job.
No.
So you can easily get kind of sucked into that, and that can create some issues. So we have to understand what our role is.
Yeah.
And the school also has to respect what our role is, just like we need to respect what their role is.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the state legislature gets very confused about that as well, because I know that there was a bill a few years ago that wanted to utilize SROs in lieu of appropriately trained personnel, and they needed to pass some legislation that would allow SROs to handcuff kids with IEPs. And that was a really bad idea. And so fortunately, like another mom and myself, one mom in particular here, she really fought hard, and actually that bill was defeated in committee, and I'm grateful that it was. But like you said, it isn't your job your job is to keep the students safe
That's
from
right.
outside criminality. You certainly deal with criminal issues within the school. For example, if there are kids in the school dealing drugs, I know that we have it here in Williamson County. So you got to manage that stuff too. But mostly it's to do with the fact that schools have become more dangerous than we ever could have imagined. I could never even have conceived of someone going into a school and committing the acts of violence that we have seen in the last decade and a half. It just absolutely is mind blowing. So I know as a parent, I have always appreciated the having our SROs in our schools in the event that our students are in danger, and it makes me feel, gives me comfort as a parent to know that y'all are there. But you've identified drug enforcement as one of your top priorities. So in a rural county like Houston County, where resources are limited, what specific strategies would you use to reduce the flow of illegal drugs while working with state and federal partners to target the people bringing them into, your community?
Yeah, so the drug issue in Houston County is a really hot topic within our community. In fact, in the door-to-door campaign that we did, we hear that over and over. I recognize that I don't think that Houston County has a greater drug problem than any of our other communities around us, but we definitely have a drug problem. I think that the issue that we're facing right now is there's no drug enforcement being exercised within the county, and so the first thing as sheriff that we have to do, and our greatest resource, is the people in our community, right? So we need to listen to what they're telling us. So if somebody's got a concern about a neighbor or a business or something that's, that they feel like, or they've witnessed illegal activity going on, when they call me, you can't just file that away. You have to go out there and investigate and at least determine if is there some factual information to this that we need to continue to investigate, or is this something that's, there's no criminal activity there. So the greatest asset we have is our residents, and that's, I'm going to use them. Mm-hmm. I have been from 2010 to 15, I was the county investigator, and I have been the last investigator in Houston County that worked larger drug scale operations. So I have a relationship with the 23rd Drug Task Force. I now have one with the 19th Drug Task Force by working in an adjoining county. But those operations that I did under a previous sheriff they netted around 20 defendants that we indicted for selling drugs in our community. And so I have the experience. I understand like how you use a criminal informant, what that looks like, the court permission that you have to do, all of the dotting I's and crossing T's legally to make sure that you make a solid case that it sticks, for anybody who's selling or transporting or manufacturing drugs in our community. So I think that, commitment, initiative, training, being able to work with our local partners like the 23rd Drug Task Force, our local surrounding counties, their detectives, working with them, because it isn't going to just be a Houston County problem. We're so rural. This is a Stewart County, Montgomery County, Dixon County, Humphreys County. We're all bleeding over into each other. Yeah. And having those relationships with those agencies and counties is what's going to make us successful. Yeah. I tell people all the time, look, we're never going to get rid of all the drugs. I mean, any candidate that tells you that is lying. But we have to do our part. We have to address it aggressively, and we have to hold those accountable. And that's what I intend to do as the next sheriff.
Do you think that there's more sometimes of an issue in the more rural areas sometimes because there's not as many eyeballs who see? I know I grew up in a rural county in California, and we had which we also Highway 395 ran right through my town. So that is a main vein, like a main highway between the mountains and Los Angeles. So we had a lot of trafficking that went through there. However, the fact that it was a rural county and not as many eyeballs, and then of course you've got kiddos who might not have as much to do. And so you see a more pervasive issue. So do you see, like, I know Davidson County is Davidson County, and Nashville and our big urban centers have drugs. But would you say that our more rural areas have just almost as much of a problem in some ways because it's rural versus being populated?
So you hear it all the time, especially in Houston County, that there's nothing for our youth to do. They don't have activities or resources to give them a different path. And I think that we do have some of those resources here, but it's definitely not as prevalent as you see in Clarksville or Nashville, where you have a lot of different options. And so I've recognized that those addicted, for the most part, especially those that have grassroots here in Houston County, they come from great families, right? They come from really good families. They were raised good. They were good people. They just they made a bad choice, and they chose a different path. As sheriff, you can't give up on them. As a community, we can't give up on them. And so I think that we have to recognize that those who are addicted, their life means something to their loved ones. They should mean something to our community, and we've lost a lot of those members of our community, good members of our community. I don't know. I think that like working drugs in a smaller area like this is easier because more people know everybody's business, so you tend to know what's going on.
Oh yeah.
Compared to Clarksville or Nashville, but I do recognize. I think that the per capita, I would say that the drug problem is probably equal to, if not a little bit greater than those in the larger areas, for sure.
Yeah. So to shift gears just a smidge, you and I were talking before we started recording. We were talking about the importance of the role of sheriff constitutionally, and why it's so important to have a constitutionally minded sheriff in control of your county. You are the first and last line of defense because you're elected. You're an elected official. You answer to the people. You don't answer to the mayor. You don't answer to the county committee. I mean, they set your budgets and stuff, but you know what I mean. That you answer to the people. And so what is your perspective on protecting Houston County from, possible, impositions of outside authority that may, politics are politics. And I think that that's one of the things that perhaps sometimes when people are new in a sheriff's role, it's the politics that tend to undo them. So how do you anticipate dealing with that kind of pressure?
So I think during the campaign, we're already dealing with some of those issues. So I've said openly and through my campaign that my job as sheriff is to protect your constitutional rights. That's what I'm elected to do, right? First and foremost. So we've had a couple of issues come up between myself and a couple of my candidates. That one of them is the flock camera system, which has been a hot topic across the state.
Yeah.
This is what I tell people, as an investigator, the flock cameras are great. Like, I'm working for agencies where we've utilized them. It does kind of make your job, I guess you could say, easier.
Yeah.
But when I decided to run for sheriff, I recognized, there is a constitutional issue with flock cameras. There truly is. I mean, I can't go get your cell phone and just look in it without a warrant. So what is the difference about me tracking your movements and getting pictures of your cars? And look, some of these flock cameras take pictures of the driver, the passenger in the vehicle at the same time.
Yeah.
That they're taking a picture of your license plate. So as I began to research flock cameras and those issues like that, I recognized that there are multiple federal lawsuits currently filed. There's
Yes.
litigation on those.
Yes.
So I have an opponent that he's an advocate for flock cameras, and I think that I understand uh, kind of the perspective that he's trying to put out there about those. But I also feel like as the sheriff,
Yeah.
instead of making my job easier, my job is to protect your constitutional rights, right? So I've told the people of Houston County that, look, we need to first let the litigation play out. Let's see, number one, is it constitutional or is it not?
Right.
Let's just say at the end of the day that federal court or the United States Supreme Court says, yes, it's constitutional. Law enforcement can access these without a warrant anytime that they want to. Well, then I think that it deserves conversation with our constituents, our public, about, is this something that you want in your community?
Yeah.
That's how we move forward with that. So that's one incident that I'm dealing with flock, flock. The other one is a very popular Republican issue, and that's 287G.
Okay. Yes. 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 Yes.
When it comes to immigration, I'm 100% for immigration. I believe that if you come to America, to our country, you should come here legally through the process. And I think that if you're here illegally, you definitely should be removed. And I think that it's evident that we have a problem, especially under the 4 years of Biden. We definitely with immigration. So, this became a hot topic before the state legislators passed the immigration law. And I had openly said, okay, what does this look like for a small county like Houston County? So when we look at the numbers in Houston County, we've had no immigration issue here. Now, that's not saying that illegals may not have traveled through Houston County. We know that or came here and worked for a contractor or different thing. To me, what it says is Houston County is 10,000 people. We have 11 slots for deputies. That's the size of the sheriff's office.
Wow.
So if we voluntarily agree to a 287G program with the ICE, then who's responsible for that? So my question, and this was my question, is, okay, so now you're going to put the burden of determining immigration status onto the local agency. Well, what happens if one of my employees make a mistake with that? If they let somebody go that shouldn't have been, or let's say that they detain somebody that shouldn't be detained, that liability then falls onto the county. And so as a sheriff, I have to look out for our taxpayers and the liability. So there was some things that were said about, well, he's not for 287G. No, I am for immigration. I'm just for smart immigration and making sure that we have some questions answered before. So the state legislators have passed the bill that says that all county sheriffs have to participate in one of 3 areas. And so my plan is to minimize that liability, is to make myself, my chief deputy, and my investigator, my administration with the sheriff's office, be responsible for determining that immigration status. We'll participate on the jail side of what that law requires. And so I think that minimizes some of our liability with the county, instead of, if I have somebody who we've trained for that to do that, and then they end up leaving, and then we're kind of stuck. So I'm 100% for the immigration. I understand where our legislators are coming from. I commend them for stepping up and doing what a lot of states should be doing. But sometimes one size doesn't fit all, and so a 10,000 population county is different than a 300,000 population county. And but we're here and we're going to participate in it, and we're going to be tough on immigration, and we're going to assist ICE in any way that they need. If they come into our county, we're going to assist them. And
I think the concern that I know I had when this issue initially came up and before the legislation was passed was that that essentially is marrying your department almost in perpetuity with the federal government. So I know that one of those levels essentially would have even put the federal government in a bit of a power position over the department at the highest level. And then you don't get a say in whether or not you need them anymore. They tell you whether or not they're needed. And that is not something I don't think Tennesseans were crazy about. But the problem is that when sheriffs were sort of put in a position to, okay, pick one, and they were like, wait a minute here, I want to think about this, because my role as a constitutional, as in my role as a person that defends the Constitution and my constituents, I want to have a thought process about this. I'm not going to just jump in because you're telling me to. They got labeled with, well, they have no problem with illegal immigration. And I can tell you, I know who those legislators were, because they were the ones who created the legislation and were pushing it. Now, I do think we should have cooperation with ICE. Obviously, here in Williamson County, we've definitely had issues with illegal immigration. But the problem that I saw with it was, for 4 years, they sat up there and watched the problem get worse while Joe Biden was president, and did nothing about it, and then waited until President Trump, thank God, was reelected, and decided to just ride his coattails, and look like they were strong on illegal immigration and help clean up the mess that they helped to make. And then Stephen Miller had to come down and handhold them so that we could actually get what should have happened. Is they should have been able to look at Tennessee and go, yep, Tennessee's taken care of. They passed all the laws we needed them to. They're check a box. That is not what happened. And so I get very fired up with this issue. And I appreciate your approach to this as being very careful in your role as the constitutional role that you would like to step into to protect the rights of your constituents, and doing it, like I said, under the Constitution. So I can completely appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that that delegation has been one of the leadership skills that you've intentionally worked hard to improve. So as sheriff, you'll be leading an entire department, and so you're not just enforcing the law yourself. What kind of culture do you want to build within the sheriff's office, and how will your deputies know that your leadership style is different from something, say, that they've experienced in the past, or maybe what's being promised by your opponents?
So, I think going back in the earlier years of my career, it was, like say from 2010 to 15, I was the only county investigator. So you learn to manage that caseload, and it's just easier to do it than maybe take like a rookie along to try to help. What I've recognized is, I recently turned 51 years old, and my career is more than half over. So it is time for us to instill in this younger generation of law enforcement things that we've learned from the people that came before us.
Yeah.
And so I've had some great leaders and great teachers along the way. And there's some things that I didn't agree with that they did, but there were a lot of good things. And so when you take that as an individual and mold that into who you are, which is what I did, I want to be able to provide those, my subordinates and those under me, with that opportunity. So I think that for me, working alongside them, and I'm not going to ask them, and we hear this all the time, I'm not going to ask them to do something I wouldn't do myself. But then at the end of the day, the sheriff just sits behind the desk, So in larger counties, that's where the sheriff has to be. There's just a lot of administrative.
Yeah.
Yes. In Houston County, 10,000 people, 11 deputies, the sheriff has to be a working sheriff. So he has to be in the community involved, working for the people and working with those that his deputies, and teaching them along the way. So I want to make sure that we're taking the younger generation, providing them with some of these roots and these old school way of doing something, and how to treat people and what small communities mean. Teaching those individuals that, I think, is going to be it's going to show a complete different style of leadership than what the sheriff's office has had for a while. Yeah. But and also bringing in a team of, I have a chief deputy that's coming. He's Tim Stavely. He's very diverse. He loves case law. So, on the legal side of it, he's going to make sure that we're not doing anything and we're up to date on a lot of different laws and case law that's coming out. He's ICAC certified, so Internet Crimes Against Children. We're going to bring that to Houston County. Our perspective is that, internet crime against children doesn't stop at the county line. It doesn't end in Montgomery County or Davidson County. It's here. So we're going to bring that. I have a great investigator that I'm bringing with over 20 years of experience. And I think like between the three of us, we're going to be able to train and lead those new deputies in order to get them prepared for their leadership roles and in the future and whatever that may look like for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we talked about earlier, this is a three-way race. So it's the Republican versus two independents, which from what I gather, one of the independents is a conservative, but he hasn't been here long enough to be bona fide. So he wasn't able to run as a bona fide Republican. And while again, like I had told you, I really do appreciate those blue state refugees, but you really got to be here a while to really understand the issues in Tennessee, because they're completely different from the blue hellscapes that they came from. And then the other guy, he is also running as an independent. However, he probably would have a D after his name if you could run with a D after your name and get elected.
Yeah. And so we've seen, this has been like a huge talking point for Houston County. So we've never had primaries in the general election before for local race. So this is I think 2 years ago we had it, but that's not a very big, I think there's like 2 or 3 seats in the county that run on that off cycle. But this is most of all your county offices run during this general cycle. And so for me, I'm a Republican, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud to say, like, look, at the end of the day, there's probably issues on both sides that you're just not going to agree with. But when it comes to conservative Christian values, that's how I vote. That's where my priorities are. And so I felt like, okay, I'm going to run as a Republican. Like, I could have chose to run as an independent, but I said, I want to get this out on the front end. I want people to know where my values are. Right. And so I felt like that was a way to be honest. I didn't do it to say, well, I think I'm better than a Democrat or independent. I just did it to, I'm a Republican. So
you're a Republican.
Right? So I'm proud of that. And then also why I think it's important for our community to know where my values are, because there's going to be people that may not align with my values, and that's okay. That's what makes democracy work, right? So that's what we have. But it's turned into a lot more than that, because we get, and I don't know if it's a lack of education or if it just doesn't fit some people's agenda. So it becomes a talking point I've heard everything from, well, the sheriff needs to be nonpartisan. Well, yeah, he serves nonpartisan, absolutely. Yeah. But how he serves should be important to everybody, right? Where our values lie, our experiences, what kind of person we are, in the community. There's our backgrounds. I think all of those issues should be important to every voter in our county or any county. Yeah. And so some people, I think some of our residents may want to look at it like, well, it's not important. It shouldn't be a political race. Well, all are political.
Oh, yes.
You're paying us to take care of money.
Exactly.
So how we do that should be important to every voter. And so, I do have an independent, two independents running against me. And like you said, one of them was not bona fide. I say there's been a lot of talk about this particular candidate, that he's from California. And I say, well, look, just because he's from California isn't a disqualifier. To me, I think that the biggest issue or the difference between me and that candidate is experience. I have over 27 years, and he has between 5 and 7, and really hasn't done much in 9 years. So that's the difference between him and I. And then my other candidate that, like you mentioned, could have ran on a partisan ticket. He has experience in law enforcement, local law enforcement, but most of his experience is managing a jail. And so there's a lot more to the sheriff's office than just managing the jail. That's an important aspect, but criminal investigations, drug work, court, civil process. school safety. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different responsibilities that the sheriff has. So I say, he has about 14 years of experience, but my experience is not just in one area. It's well-rounded, well-diverse in every aspect of the sheriff's office.
Yeah. And what about your other opponent? The more probably left-leaning, but he's running as an independent as well. What is the biggest difference between your approach and his approach?
Well, I think on the surface you could say, I'm open about my values and how I'm running, such as running on the Republican ticket. I think a couple of talking points. He's talked about up to a $15 million jail expansion or renovation, and that I don't see that need. I was here when that jail opened about 20 years ago, and look, it's a small jail. We're a 10,000 population county. It houses comfortably 37. I think it could go up to 55. With bunks. That's a small jail, but we can manage that without a taxpayer increase.
Yeah.
$15 million is a lot of money. That's a huge tax burden. So those are one of his talking points. There's some differences. I think he's mentioned like putting 2 people per car. I don't think that for me is feasible. You're talking about 2 or 3 cars out per shift per day. You double them up, you cut that response time in half, because if they're on a dog complaint and then something across the county happens, you don't have that extra car that's going to be able to go. So look, this is democracy at its best, because those are legitimate talking points. That is what he feels is going to be the best way to move forward, or his goals or plans. And then you look at mine, and those are legitimate talking points that our community needs to look at and study about what looks best for Houston County.
Yeah. I mean, I really do appreciate that fact, because what I would love for more people to do is sit down and listen to interviews like this one, or get into written interviews that you see in the newspaper, or even call them up and say, hey, I have some questions. Can you tell me how you would handle this, this, and this? But what we have, it seems like, to my, utter disappointment, every election season, we seem to have an underwhelming response to our access, ability, and rights to vote. And people just, and I don't know if it's because people are jaded because they feel as though our voter integrity is compromised, that we don't feel like it matters. I mean, I always tell people, whatever those excuses are, nothing changes the fact that there were so many people who came before us that died. They bled and they died so that you could have the ability to go into a ballot box and vote. Now, what happens after that, of course, we have to manage it. But the fact that you can do it should be something that you do just to honor that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because our, World War I, World War II, Revolutionary War, all of it. They are our founding fathers. They lost, so many of them lost everything, including their lives, their fortunes, their families. So we owe it to them to do what it is that they set this up for us to be able to do. And that is to go and to vote. And I would say, after everything I've heard today, I really, really think that you have such a great combination of experience and your education, and just having the diversity of experiences that you have. It'll enable you to be more creative with solutions, where past may not have had that opportunity to be that creative, because they just didn't have the experience to do it.
And when you talk about voter integrity, Tennessee, we're fortunate. We've got some of the strongest voter laws in the country.
We do, but
we could do
better.
but for the most part, I think that we're way better off than a lot of states. And
definitely better off than California, where they can harvest votes and everybody votes by mail. We don't want to see that. But being in the thick of the voter integrity in a county like Houston, it's a lot easier, I would think, to manage because it's a smaller amount of people. It's a smaller amount of ballots. If you've got people who have their eye on it, it certainly would be much harder for somebody to pull some shenanigans. So I'm very hopeful that you'll probably have a very legitimate experience there.
Elections here, and she stays on top of it. They've done a great job, and I have my hat goes off to them because they've done a really good job.
That's great. That's great. Well, it was so great talking to you. Before we go, will you tell people where they can get a hold of you, your socials, where they can go donate, any of that stuff?
Yeah. So I have a Facebook page and Instagram page. It's Brian Hoover Sheriff. I do make daily posts on there, and you could go back a year and a half from when I started my campaign and look at a lot of my goals, experiences, and things that I want to do. I don't talk about my other candidates on Facebook. We have debates for that, and
that's right.
I try to keep it about me and what I'm trying to bring to the table. So I do have those social media sites. I do have Venmo, and I also have TruthWire, I think it is, for campaign donations. But we're about a week and a half from the election day, and we're like I said, we're going to finish out down here on Main Street by the election office. That's where I'm fixing to head to and answer some questions. But also, if you could shoot me a private message on Facebook, and I'll be glad to answer it. I'm very easy and accessible to get hold of.
Yeah, I would encourage. I mean, that's really quite something to be able to have the candidate down there. People want to come and talk to you and ask you a question. I encourage them to go down and engage, because that's right. Because then you've done your due diligence. You're not just going to sit on social media and complain. So 2 things: vote, because if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. Just shut up. Number 2, if you've got a guy like Brian who is accessible as he is, there's no excuse for you to say, well, I didn't know this, so I didn't go vote. So 2 things, get it done. I just want to thank you again, Brian, for being here. It's been a pleasure, and I think that this was a great conversation. I want to ask everybody to go to truthwirenews.com. The price of admission is just your email address. If you will subscribe, you will get access to, I think I've got almost 300 articles in there, and it's all Tennessee. So if you want to kind of get the inside baseball, I go to the meetings. I have people who call me. I know stuff. So go in there and look at my articles, and then you will get educated. Come to TruthWire's YouTube page and subscribe and like. And I also have another page that sort of talks more about national issues, and that's a channel called Still Not Canceled. I would love that too. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for hanging with us. And I really hope you got a lot of value out of this conversation today. I love you all, and I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.